My name is Evelyn Rutherford, 72 years old. Once a war photographer, now just another quiet resident at the Silver Harbor retirement home. That morning began like every other. The smell of disinfectant, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the routine tray of oatmeal and pills. Then a new nurse walked in. Young, dark-skinned, with a gentle accent that carried warmth I hadn't heard in decades. She smiled and said, "Good morning, Mama Rose." The porcelain cup slipped from my fingers before I could breathe. It shattered against the tiled floor, the sound sharp as gunfire. For a second, the whole hallway froze, sunlight trembling on the floor, tea bleeding into the cracks like spilled memory. No one here knew that name. Not the director, not the other residents, not even my doctor. Mama Rose. That was the name I buried 40 years ago, along with the man I loved. Back then, I was Rose Evelyn, a photojournalist in the Colombian conflict, covering the chaos with a camera that never stopped shaking. Miguel Velasquez, a field doctor with hands too kind for war, gave me that name. "Mama Rose," he'd say whenever I stitched up a wound or shared my ration bread with the wounded. Then one day, he vanished into the jungle with his medical team. Oh, no body, no goodbye, just silence. And I swore no one would ever call me that name again. I looked up at the nurse. My voice trembled more than my hands. "Why? Why did you call me that?" She tilted her head, puzzled by my panic. "Because that's what my mother told me to call you." Her voice softened, like she was afraid to break something fragile between us. "She said you saved her life." The room went still. Even the air stopped moving. I felt the pulse in my throat, heavy and erratic. My ears rang. The smell of antiseptic faded, replaced by jungle rot and diesel smoke. For a moment, the retirement home around me disappeared, and I was 28 again, standing ankle-deep in mud, a camera around my neck, and a girl's hand clutching my sleeve. "She said you saved her life." Impossible. That girl, Isabella, had been caught in the crossfire. I carried her out of the village after the bombing. I thought she'd died the next day. I'd seen the sheet pulled over her. My chest tightened. "What's your name?" I asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara Velasquez." Velasquez. The name hit me harder than the smell of blood ever did. Miguel's name. My mouth opened, but no words came. I could only stare at her. This young woman with his eyes, his calm, that same small scar on the chin. Outside, the morning light pressed through the blinds, slicing across the room like bars of a cage. I used to think the past was something you could bury under enough years, that time itself could serve as soil. But standing there, barefoot on shattered porcelain, I realized I'd been wrong all along. The past doesn't stay buried. It waits. And sometimes, it walks back into your life, wearing scrubs and calling you Mama Rose. When Clara left my room that morning, I couldn't stop hearing that name echoing against the walls. Mama Rose. It scraped against the years like a rusted hinge. I sat there, staring at the broken teacup, until the pieces blurred into 1,000 reflections of the same face. Mine, younger, bloodied, unafraid. And just like that, the years folded backward. It was 1973, Colombia. The smell of smoke and coffee, the weight of humidity that never lifted. I was 28, working for the Global Lens, one of the only female photographers allowed near the combat zones. My editors wanted blood, fire, and crying children. The kind of pictures that sell papers, they'd say. I lived on instant coffee, adrenaline, and film rolls stuffed in my boots. Every photo felt like a confession. Every night I swore I'd stop, and every dawn, I'd load another roll. Miguel Velasquez entered my life in a blur of gunfire and morphine. He was a young field doctor, barely 30, with the calm of someone who believed in miracles even while stitching up what was left of people. He had earth-colored eyes, soft but unyielding, and a way of saying my name that made it sound less foreign, less borrowed. Evelyn became Evelina. And then, one night after too much rum and too many ghosts, he called me Mama Rose. "You take care of everyone but yourself," he said, cleaning his glasses with the corner of my scarf. "You mother the dead, the dying, the lost." So from now on, Mama Rose. I laughed then, though something in me cracked a little. We were stationed in a makeshift camp outside Baransabermeja, a half-collapsed church turned into a field hospital. I took photos during the day and helped Miguel at night, holding lanterns while he worked. The world outside screamed, but inside, it was only his voice and the sound of scissors cutting bandages. "If you take one last picture," he said once, wiping sweat from his brow, "make it of peace." "Peace doesn't sell magazines," I answered. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "Then stop selling it." He made it sound simple, as if peace were something you could photograph if you just stood still long enough. When I discovered I was pregnant, it was the only time I thought maybe I could stop running. I told no one, not even Miguel. There was never time for soft news between air raids. But the universe doesn't let you keep secrets for long. A month later, during an evacuation near the Magdalena River, a mortar hit the convoy. I woke under a collapsed wall, deaf on one side, blood down my legs. Miguel's hand was the first thing I saw through the dust. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear him. By the time I understood what had happened, the child was gone. He held me as the helicopter lifted us out, the smell of antiseptic and gunpowder blending into one. I never saw him cry, but his hands shook when he took the copper bracelet from his wrist and fastened it on mine. It was engraved with tiny letters, R.E., for Rose Evelyn, he whispered, "So you remember that you lived." Days later, he disappeared. The Red Cross said his convoy was ambushed. I waited for a week, then a month. Every knock on the door made my stomach twist. Eventually, I packed my camera and left the jungle, alone, angry and carrying more ghosts than film. I ended up in Bogota, renting a room above a print shop. I told myself I'd never take another photo again. But then I met Isabella. She was 17, barely skin and bone, covered in ash when they brought her in after a bombing in Cartagena. I'd been there to photograph the aftermath, but when she grabbed my arm and whispered, "Don't let them leave me," I dropped the camera. I stayed with her all night. She had a cut above her eye that wouldn't close, so I wrapped it the way Miguel once wrapped mine. She reminded me of the child I'd lost, defiant even in pain. When the evacuation came, I hid her in the back of a supply truck, pretending she was my assistant. For 3 weeks, we traveled together, moving from town to town. She'd ask about Miguel, about the world outside, about my camera. One night, she said, "If I live, I'll name my daughter Rose." So I never forget the woman who didn't leave me behind. I remember laughing through tears. "No, Isabella, name her after someone you can forgive." She didn't understand then, and maybe neither did I. On the last day I saw her, the air was thick with ash. I'd just developed a role. Photos of her standing in front of a wall of smoke, holding a wilted white flower. It wasn't perfect, too much blur, too much truth. But it was the only picture I couldn't stop looking at. "What will you call it?" she asked. "La Rosa," I said. That same afternoon, the camp was hit again. I shoved the roll of negatives into her hands before the chaos swallowed us. "Keep it safe. Don't lose it." Then the explosions came, and we were separated. I searched for her for months. Every list of survivors I found, her name was missing. I convinced myself she'd died, because it was easier than imagining what else might have happened. A year later, I saw La Rosa on the cover of Global Lens. The caption read, "Photograph by Isabella Velázquez, winner of the International Peace Prize." I stared at the page until the ink blurred. My name wasn't there. Not even a mention. I told myself I didn't care, that it was better that way, that the world needed the picture, not the credit. But part of me broke, because La Rosa wasn't just an image. It was the last heartbeat of the life I'd lost. Miguel, the child, the war, the name Rose. I kept the magazine folded in my drawer for decades, like a wound that never healed properly. And the bracelet, the copper one with R.E. I lost it somewhere along the way. I always thought it had fallen from my wrist during a transfer flight. Sometimes, late at night, I'd swear I could still feel the faint indentation it left on my skin. Now, sitting in this sterile room, decades later, with Clara's voice still echoing. My mother said you saved her life. I can't help but wonder, was Isabella alive all this time? Did she tell her daughter about me? Or did she just tell her about Mama Rose, the myth, not the woman who failed to keep a promise? I glance at the sunlight spilling across my wrinkled hands, the faint groove still circling my wrist like an invisible cuff. Some ghosts don't fade. They just change uniforms. Night in the jungle had a way of swallowing sound. Only the hum of insects and the low moan of the wounded filled the air. A strange kind of lullaby for people who had forgotten what peace sounded like. That night, the rain leaked through the canvas roof of the medical tent, dripping onto the kerosene lamp between our cots. I sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, wiping the lens of my camera with the edge of my scarf, pretending I was still just a photographer, not a woman who'd lost too much. Isabella lay on the cot beside me, her arm in a sling, her hair matted with ash. She was 17, but the war had aged her eyes beyond measure. Every so often she would wince, her breath catching like a hiccup of pain. Does it hurt? I asked softly. Only when I breathe, she whispered, then tried to laugh. I passed her my canteen, but she didn't drink. Instead, she reached out, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around mine. Her palm was small and warm, human, fragile, real in a world that no longer was. If I live, she said suddenly, I'll name my daughter Rose. So I'll never forget you. The words hit me harder than any explosion ever had. The lamp flickered, catching the wet shimmer in her eyes. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever wanted to remember me before. Not in this way. I'd spent years being the one behind the camera, the invisible witness. Don't, I said finally, voice shaking. Don't name her after me? Why not? She asked. Because names carry weight. They drag ghosts behind them. Give her a name that belongs to forgiveness, not to me. She frowned, confused, her young face crumpling like paper. But I want her to be brave. Then teach her kindness first. Bravery will follow. Outside, the thunder rolled through the valley like distant artillery. I watched the shadows of the rain slide down the tent wall, streaking the light into ribbons. Somewhere in the dark, someone groaned, someone else prayed. Isabella squeezed my hand tighter. Do you ever miss your home? She asked. I almost said yes, but realized I couldn't remember where home even was anymore. I miss silence, I said instead, and mornings that don't start with running. She smiled faintly. Then one day, when it's safe, come find me. I'll make you coffee, and we'll sit in silence. That was such an innocent promise, a child's promise, but I believed her. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. For a second, her face reminded me of something lost. The child I never got to hold, the future I'd buried beneath the rubble of every assignment. Her breathing slowed, the rain softened to a hush. I should have been asleep, but I couldn't stop watching the rise and fall of her chest, terrified that if I blinked, she would disappear like everything else. When she finally drifted off, I took the copper bracelet from my wrist. Miguel's bracelet, the one with the tiny engraving R.E., and looped it gently around her fingers. For luck, I whispered, and for remembering. She stirred, half awake. What if I lose it? Then maybe it'll find its way to someone who needs it more. She smiled, eyes still closed. Like your daughter? I froze. The word daughter felt like a wound reopening. But I only said, yes, maybe like that. Outside, dawn began to bleed through the mist, a thin gray light that turned every puddle into a mirror. That was the last quiet night I had in that war. And years later, when I heard a young nurse whisper, Mama Rose, in a sunlit room, I realized maybe that bracelet had found its way home after all. The next few days at Silver Harbor passed with a strange kind of stillness, like the air before a storm. I watched the young nurse, Clara, move through the corridors with quiet precision, her sneakers whispering across the linoleum floors. She hummed when she worked, a melody that didn't belong in this sterile place. Soft, minor, old, Spanish. Sometimes, when she thought I was asleep, she'd murmur to herself, Despacio, mi alma. Slowly, my soul. The words wrapped around me like déjà vu. I had whispered that same phrase to Isabella once during a fever to calm her trembling. No one else in this country should have known it. I started watching Clara more closely. The way she rolled her R's, the little cross she drew with her thumb before giving an injection. Every gesture tugged at a buried memory. One afternoon, the sun burned through the blinds, slicing my room into gold and shadow. Clara came in with my pills and a small smile. "You should eat something first, Mama. I mean, Ms. Rutherford." I raised an eyebrow. "You can say it. Mama Rose, right?" Her cheeks flushed. "Sorry. It just slips out." She set the tray down and began to tidy my nightstand. That's when I saw it. A glint of copper near her wrist. The color hit me like lightning. It was a bracelet, thin and weathered, with a faint engraving rubbed by time. She took it off absent-mindedly and set it on the table while she poured water. When she turned to close the blinds, I reached for it. My fingers shook as I traced the letters carved into the metal. R.E. The edges were worn, but I would have known that engraving in the dark. Miguel had done it himself with a scalpel and a matchstick for heat. My throat went dry. "Clara, where did you get this?" She glanced at me, confused by the tremor in my voice. "That? Oh, it was my grandmother's." "Your grandmother?" I repeated, though the words sounded foreign in my mouth. "Yes," she smiled faintly. "She said a woman named Rose gave it to her. Said it brought her luck." Time stopped. The air in the room thickened, the sound of the hallway faded into a dull roar in my ears. I stared at the bracelet, at the ghost of my initials. And every memory I'd spent a lifetime burying came clawing back to the surface. Miguel's hands fastening it on my wrist. Isabella's voice asking, "What if I lose it?" My own reply, "Then maybe it'll find its way to someone who needs it more." It had. It had found her granddaughter. "What was your grandmother's name?" I asked, already knowing the answer but too afraid to hear it. Clara looked puzzled, almost shy. "Isabella Velasquez. You probably wouldn't know her. She used to tell stories about a photographer who—" She stopped, noticing the way my hands were trembling, the way I clutched that bracelet like it was oxygen. "Ms. Rutherford, are you okay?" I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Yes. I think I did know her." Clara's face brightened, relief flickering across her features. "Really? She always said you were like an angel. She told me, if you ever meet Mama Rose, tell her I kept her promise." I wanted to ask what promise, but my voice wouldn't come. The room blurred. Clara picked up her clipboard, oblivious to the storm unraveling in front of her. "I'll bring your lunch in an hour," she said cheerfully. Then she slipped out, leaving the door open, and the bracelet behind. When I was sure she was gone, I held it up to the light. The copper caught the sun and glowed like fire, like the sunsets over the jungle where Miguel once said peace looked most real. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. If Clara was Isabella's granddaughter, that meant Isabella had lived long enough to have a family, a child, a story. And she'd never told the world who I really was. Maybe she'd kept my secret to protect me. Maybe she'd buried my name the same way I'd buried hers. I closed my hand around the bracelet, feeling the weight of 40 years of silence press into my palm. The notice went up on the bulletin board one morning. PHO exhibition. Witnesses of War. Sponsored by the Silver Harbor Heritage Program. The staff was buzzing about it for days. "Look of it, Miss Hen. Don't, Rutherford," they told me. "It's about women who made history." I wanted to laugh. Women who made history usually died before anyone thanked them. But curiosity, that old reflex I thought I buried, tugged at me. On the afternoon of the opening, Clara insisted on escorting me in my wheelchair. "They say some of the photos are from South America," she said brightly. My grandmother might have known the photographers. South America. The words prickled against my skin. We rolled into the recreation hall, which had been transformed into a makeshift gallery. White sheets hung from the ceiling, turning the fluorescent room into something soft and reverent. On every wall, frames glimmered beneath the light. Faces, ruins, landscapes of pain. Then I saw it. The photograph was displayed in the center, larger than all the others. A young girl standing barefoot amid rubble, holding a single wilted white flower. Whirling around her, her eyes staring right into the lens, unafraid, unflinching. The caption beneath the frame read, La Rosa, 1973. Photograph by Isabella Velasquez. My breath stopped. I gripped the armrest until my knuckles whitened. I would have known that image anywhere. I took it with my own shaking hands, seconds before the bombs fell. The girl in the picture wasn't just a survivor. She was my proof that beauty could exist in hell. And now? Here it was, sanctified under another name. Oh, Clara said softly beside me. That's my grandmother's photo. I turned to look at her, was smiling, proud. She didn't see the tremor that ran through me, the sweat breaking at my temples. She told me this picture changed her life, Clara continued. Said it was taken by a woman named Rose. I guess she never said that she wasn't the one behind the camera. Throat constricted. The voices around us blurred into static. Volunteers moved through the crowd, talking about legacy, heroism, female courage. No one mentioned me. No one knew that I'd been there, crawling through dust, pressing the shutter through tears. I stared up at the photo. My photo. And for a second, I was back in that moment. The smoke, the heartbeat in my ears, Isabella's voice shouting my name through the chaos. A camera flash went off nearby, a tourist snapping pictures of the exhibit, and the sudden burst of light struck my face. White. Blinding. For a heartbeat, it wasn't a camera anymore. It was the flash of the explosion that took Miguel, the same white fire that erased my child, my future, my name. The sound that came out of me wasn't a scream, but something smaller. A dry gasp that cracked open 40 years of silence. Ms. Rutherford? Clara's voice came from far away. Are you all right? But I couldn't answer. I was staring at the brass plaque below the photo. On loan from the Velasquez family archive. Family. That word twisted like a knife. Miguel Velasquez, the doctor who gave me that bracelet, and Isabella Velasquez. The girl I'd saved. 2 names carved into my past. 2 lives that had continued without me. I wheeled closer to the frame until my reflection appeared beside the girl's image. My wrinkled face next to her young one, both caught in the same piece of glass. We looked like mother and daughter separated by time. And under her name. Under her life. My own had been quietly erased. The curator passed by, smiling politely. Beautiful, isn't it? That girl went on to become a legend. They say the photographer vanished soon after. Vanished. I wanted to tell him I hadn't vanished. I'd just been surviving. But the words dissolved in my mouth like dust. Do you want to sit down, Mrs. Knight? Rutherford? Clara asked gently. I shook my head. My eyes were fixed on the corner of the photograph. The faint reflection of a figure behind the lens. My figure. I had never noticed it before. But there I was, a ghost in my own picture. My heart clenched, not from anger but from something heavier. A grief too old to name. As people moved through the room, I felt invisible again. The crowd took pictures of my photograph without ever knowing the woman who'd taken it was sitting just a few feet away. I whispered to myself, so softly Clara couldn't hear. She lived my life better than I did. The copper bracelet around Clara's wrist caught the light just then, gleaming like a signal from another lifetime. Somewhere, Miguel and Isabella's ghosts must have been watching, laughing at the cruel poetry of it all. My legacy had survived, but under someone else's name, and maybe that should have been enough. But it wasn't. Because for the first time in 40 years, I wanted my story back. That night, the world outside my window was all fog and ocean wind. Silver Harbor went quiet after dinner, just the sound of rain against the glass, and the low hum of the night nurse's cart in the hallway. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the exhibition over and over. The photo, the name beneath it, the crowd clapping for someone who wasn't there. Every flash from a visitor's camera still burned in my eyes. Across the corridor, someone was humming. Soft, low, familiar. Duermete, mi rosa. Clara's voice floated through the open door like smoke. The same lullaby I used to whisper to Isabella under the leaking roof of a war tent. It made something inside me ache. Not the ache of loss this time, but of recognition. I sat up, switching on the small lamp beside my bed. The light hit the copper bracelet lying on my nightstand. I'd cleaned it earlier, polishing it until the letters R, E, glimmered faintly again. For the first time in years, it looked alive. That was when I knew I couldn't keep living as a ghost in someone else's story. I reached under the bed for the old wooden box I hadn't opened since the day I moved into the home. Its hinges creaked like it resented being remembered. Inside were the few things I'd carried across decades. A brittle press card from the global lens, corners torn, photo faded beyond recognition, a cracked Leica lens, and a small strip of undeveloped film, sealed in black paper. I had found that strip years ago, tucked inside a book I'd brought from Colombia. It was labeled in my own handwriting, Camp Velasquez, last roll. For years I told myself it was ruined. Exposure, age, dust. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid of what might be on it. Life. Afraid of what wasn't. My hands trembled as I lifted the film. I could almost smell the chemicals from those old dark rooms. The vinegar sting, the metallic taste of fixer, the click of the timer. The journalist in me, the one I'd buried, woke up with a single fierce thought. If the world had rewritten my story, I would rewrite it back. The next morning, when Clara came in with my medication, I didn't let her speak first. "Close the door," I said. She looked startled, but obeyed. I opened the wooden box and placed the press card and the film strip on the table between us. The badge looked so small against her hands. The hands of a generation that had never known war but carried its echoes in their blood. "Clara," I said, "you told me your grandmother knew a woman named Rose. Do you still believe that?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. She said you were a photographer who saved her. I thought it was just one of her stories." "It wasn't," I said. "It was mine." I pushed the film toward her. "Inside this is the truth she never told you. And I need your help to bring it back to light." Her eyes widened. "You mean you want to develop it?" "Yes. Tomorrow, I want to see what's really on it, who's really in it. I want to know who survived." He hesitated. "But Ms. Rutherford, it's been decades. The negatives could be destroyed." I smiled faintly. "So was I, Clara. Look, still here." For a long moment she said nothing. The rain tapped gently on the window, steady as a heartbeat. Then she nodded. "All right. I'll bring the equipment from the art therapy room. We can set up a dark room in the laundry closet. It's small but lightproof." "Good," I said. "We start at dawn." That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not from fear, but anticipation. I sat by the window, watching the lights from the harbor flicker in the fog. It had been so long since I'd felt purpose. The years had dulled everything. Memory, guilt, even hunger. But now the old fire was back. The one Miguel used to tease me about. "You don't take pictures," he'd once said. "You steal time from God." Maybe I was about to steal it back. I thought of Miguel then. His steady hands, his voice saying, "If you take one last picture, make it of peace." Maybe peace wasn't something you photographed. Maybe it was something you made yourself. Frame by frame, decision by decision. I took the bracelet and slipped it on my wrist again. It fit tighter than I remembered. But I didn't mind. The weight grounded me. When I caught my reflection in the dark window, I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Eyes sharp again, shoulders squared. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't hiding behind the lens. I was stepping back into focus. Just before midnight, Clara peeked in. "Can't sleep either," she whispered. "No," I said, smiling. "You know, when I was your age, I thought I'd live and die by the truth. Then I learned, truth has its own way of dying first." She frowned, unsure if she should respond. "Maybe it's time to bring it back to life," she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked, at the same eyes as Miguel's, the same calm defiance. "Yes," I said, "tomorrow we'll do that." After she left, I sat in the dark, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade down the hall. The bracelet caught the moonlight, a soft copper glow against my skin. I laid the film strip on my lap, tracing the outline of its edges. In that fragile piece of celluloid, my entire life was suspended. The war, the loss, the love, the lie. And tomorrow, I would face it all. I didn't know what I would find, whether the last picture was of Miguel, or of Isabella, or of the sky falling apart. But whatever it showed, I was done being silent. Done letting others decide what my story was worth. I whispered to the darkness, to the ghosts that still lingered in the corners of my room, "Tomorrow, you'll finally be seen." Then, for the first time in years, I felt the steady beat of my own pulse. Strong, alive, insistent. It was the rhythm of something being reborn. The next morning, Clara didn't come. It was another nurse, older, tight-lipped, moving with the precision of someone told not to talk. She handed me my pills, avoided my eyes, and left before I could ask where Clara was. The film roll still sat on my table, wrapped in its black paper like a secret that had already started to rot. By lunch, 2 members of the administration board appeared at my door, all smiles stretched too thin. One of them, a man with a clipboard and an expensive watch, spoke first. "Ms. Rutherford, we've received a few concerns about you, disturbing staff and residents with stories about war crimes and stolen identities." I stared at him. "Stories?" I said. "You mean my life?" He smiled the way people do when they've already decided you're delusional. "Let's just say it would be best for everyone if you took some time to rest. We've arranged a quieter room for you, away from the common areas. I mean isolation. It's for your peace of mind," he said, already signing a form. They moved me to room 42, the one at the end of the hall that smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. The window didn't open, the curtains were nailed to the wall. The radio didn't work. For the first time in years, I felt the old, familiar chill of confinement. The same airless dread from war bunkers and bomb shelters. I asked about Clara twice. The night nurse only said, "She's been reassigned." By evening, I knew something was wrong. From behind my closed door, I heard whispers near the nurse's station. The muffled static of a phone call, a chair creaking. The voice was unmistakable. Clara. She was crying softly, trying to keep it down. "Grandma," she whispered in Spanish, "she's still alive." The real Mama rose. Silence on the other end, then a rush of words too fast to catch. Clara's tone turned desperate. "No, I didn't mean to. I didn't know. They found out we were trying to develop the film. They said she's confused, that she's lying." My pulse hammered in my ears. I pressed my ear against the door, hardly breathing. "What should I do?" Clara asked. "They're saying I broke confidentiality. They might fire me." Another pause. A voice through the receiver. Faint, trembling, but I could almost swear it was familiar. "Then leave it alone, Clara. Some names are meant to stay buried." Then, the click of disconnection. I pulled back from the door, my body shaking. "Grandma, there was only one possibility. Isabella was alive. Old enough to be a grandmother now. And still keeping the secret that had rewritten both our lives." I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the copper bracelet until the engraving pressed into my palm. Why would she still hide it? Was it guilt? Fear? Or love twisted into silence? The corridor went quiet again. But I couldn't. I replayed every word Clara had said. "They found out we were trying to develop the film. They said she's lying. Someone at the top didn't want the truth to surface. Maybe the administration feared scandal. Maybe the Velasquez family feared their legend being undone. Either way, I had become the problem again. Just like 40 years ago, when editors spiked my reports because peace wasn't profitable. That night, I didn't sleep. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel like a heartbeat counting down. I thought of Clara, alone, terrified, torn between her job and her conscience. I thought of Isabella. Her face in that photograph, her promise to name her daughter after someone she could forgive. Maybe this was her forgiveness, keeping my name safe all these years. But what was safety without truth? I stood up, slow and stiff, and moved to the door. Locked, of course. They'd turned the handle around so it locked from the outside. I laughed under my breath. For my peace of mind, they'd said. The bracelet caught the dim light, its copper glow pulsing like a signal. I whispered to it, to Miguel, to whoever still listened. They think they can bury me again. The walls hummed faintly with the air conditioning. Somewhere down the hall, a bell rang for midnight rounds. And through the silence that followed, I could still hear Clara's voice. Soft, frightened, and loyal. She's still alive? The real Mama Rose. A week later, the home was buzzing again. Flyers were pinned to every corkboard. Honoring Isabella Velasquez. A legacy of truth and light. The staff polished the floors. The residents were told to dress nicely for the cameras. The local news had come, and so had the museum board. There would be speeches, champagne, and a plaque dedication. I sat in my isolation room and watched the preparations through the tiny slit of the door. My blood thrummed in my temples. They were going to honor her. Again. And I, the ghost behind the frame, would stay buried. Until tonight. I still had the original negative. Clara had smuggled it back to me 2 days earlier, wrapped inside a napkin from the cafeteria. Her eyes had been red from crying. They told me to stay away from you, she whispered. They said you were confused, but I found this in the archive box. It's yours. She placed the film in my hand. It felt like holding my own heartbeat. I also had the bracelet, polished and gleaming again, its copper catching the light like a small flame. If they wanted a ceremony about truth, I would give them one. The day of the event, the hall was transformed into a cathedral of nostalgia. Large prints of La Rosa hung from the walls, candles flickered beneath. Rows of people, journalists, donors, and young photographers, filled the seats, whispering like parishioners awaiting revelation. At the front, a banner read, Isabella Velasquez, the woman who showed the world compassion. When they wheeled her in, the crowd rose to applaud. She was 97, frail and elegant, silver hair pinned back, a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her eyes were still sharp, still that impossible shade of storm gray. When our gazes met, I saw recognition flicker, then vanish behind practiced composure. The director began his speech. Today, we honor not just a photographer, but a survivor, a witness to history. That was my cue. I rose from the back of the hall, leaning on my cane, the film and bracelet clutched tight in my palm. The whispers rippled instantly, a resident interrupting, an old woman walking too slowly down the aisle. But I kept moving. Each step echoed louder than the applause. When I reached the front, I turned toward the audience. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Before you finish rewriting history again, perhaps you should hear it from the one who lived it." A hush fell over the room. The director frowned. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." "No." I turned toward the woman in the wheelchair. "Isabella." Her name cracked through the silence like lightning. I looked up slowly. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, trembled. 40 years ago, I said, you told me that if you ever had a child, you'd name her after forgiveness. Did you forget?" The cameras clicked. The crowd turned toward her, then toward me. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Tears gathered along the edge of her lashes. "Evelyn," she whispered. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone in the crowd repeated the name as if testing its reality. "Evelyn Rutherford? The war correspondent?" "No," I said. "Mama Rose. That was the name the soldiers gave me. The one you used to keep me alive, and the one that nearly erased me." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the bracelet. The copper glowed under the stage light. I held it up. "This," I said, "belonged to Miguel Velasquez. He gave it to me before he disappeared. I gave it to her, to Isabella, before the last bombing. She was 17. She promised she'd keep it safe. And she did." I looked at her then, really looked, and saw the girl beneath the wrinkles, the ash, the guilt. "Tell them the truth, Isabella." She covered her face with trembling hands. The microphones picked up the sound of her breath, shallow and breaking. "I never stole your photo," she said at last, voice cracking. They used my name to keep you safe." The crowd erupted, reporters shouting questions, phones lifted high, flashes bursting like lightning. What do you mean to keep her safe? Was this government interference? Are you saying Evelyn Rutherford is the real author of La Rosa? Isabella turned toward me, eyes shining. You were on every blacklist, Evelyn. The government called you a traitor, a propagandist. They wanted you silenced. If your name had appeared under that photo, you would have been arrested. Maybe worse. I stood frozen. Miguel's brother worked for the embassy, she continued, voice trembling. He begged me to take your negatives, to release them under my name. He said it was the only way your work could live. Oh, so you took my name? No, she said softly. I protected it. I protected you. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. My throat burned. Rage, confusion, gratitude all tangled together. You could have told me, I whispered. You could have told the world. I tried, she said, crying now. But by the time it was safe, you were gone. And when they called me a legend, I was too ashamed to correct them. The director looked horrified. The journalists were alive with frenzy. Cameras flashed, capturing every tear, every silence. The weight of the years between us pressed heavy on my chest. I wanted to hate her. I truly did. But standing there, I saw not a thief, but a survivor like me, shaped and scarred by the same war. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. All this time, I said, I thought you buried me. But you carried me instead. She looked up, eyes wide, then smiled through her tears. We both carried each other. I held out the bracelet. It belongs to you. She shook her head weakly. No, Mama Rose, it always belonged to you. Around us, the reporters were still shouting questions. Clara appeared at the edge of the stage, face streaked with tears. I beckoned her forward. This is Clara Velasquez, I said to the cameras. Isabella's granddaughter, the bridge between two lives. She's the reason the truth finally found its way home. The applause that followed was unlike any I'd ever heard. Not loud, not wild, but deep, raw, human. The kind that feels like absolution. The museum lights glimmered off the copper bracelet, now warm against my palm. I turned to face the audience one last time. 40 years ago, a picture was taken in a war zone. They said it showed a girl who survived. But the truth is, 2 of us did. Later, when the chaos settled, I knelt beside Isabella's wheelchair. They'll rewrite the stories now, I said, with both our names. She smiled faintly. No, one. Which one? The one we both earned, Mama Rose. Her hand found mine, frail but steady. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of forgiveness. Not as something given or taken, but shared. As the crowd dispersed, Clara helped me to the back of the hall. I turned once more toward the photo on display. La Rosa. The girl with the white flower, forever standing in the ashes. For the first time, I didn't look at her and feel pain. I felt peace. The flashes from the cameras flickered again, but they no longer blinded me. They illuminated. The truth may set you free, but first it burns everything around you. Within 24 hours of the ceremony, the world outside Silver Harbor was on fire. Headlines blared across morning screens and digital feeds. Elderly woman crashes tribute event, claims to be true, photographer behind La Rosa. Evelyn Rutherford, hero or hoax? The Great Mama Rose mystery. Fraud or forgotten genius? Someone had leaked the video from the ceremony. It showed me trembling under the lights, Isabella crying, reporters shouting. But what the public saw wasn't revelation, it was chaos. By noon, every network was running the same 2-second clip. Me raising the copper bracelet, my voice cracking as I said, I took that photo. The pundits had a field day. They called it the delusion of an old woman craving relevance. One commentator sneered on air. Let's be honest, it's easy for someone in a care home to claim anything. There's no evidence this Evelyn woman even held a camera back then. Another added, if she truly was the photographer, why did she wait 40 years? Sounds more like attention-seeking than justice. The words hit harder than bullets. At the home, the director avoided me completely. When I did see him, he was flanked by lawyers. "Ms. Rutherford," he said stiffly. "Until we understand the situation, we ask that you refrain from speaking to the press or staff about this matter." "You mean stay silent again?" I replied. His expression didn't change. "This is for your protection and the facility's reputation." They confiscated my phone, restricted visitors, and reassigned nurses. My meals arrived wordlessly. Even the residents I'd once shared stories with now looked away in the dining hall. The whispers followed me down every corridor. Crazy old woman, liar, attention seeker. And Clara. Clara was gone. I learned about her suspension from a sympathetic janitor who still believed me. "They said she leaked the footage," he whispered while emptying my trash. "Accused her of violating privacy policy. She's been sent home pending investigation." "Investigation," I said bitterly. "That's what they call punishment before proof." "She's worried about you, though. Asked if you were safe." That night, I sat awake in the dark, staring at the copper bracelet. It glowed faintly under the moonlight. The letters R. E. Half faded but stubborn. I thought of Clara's trembling voice on the phone, telling her grandmother she's still alive. Now she'd lost her job because of me. 2 days later, the local paper printed an op-ed, "The Myth of Mama Rose. Why Memory Isn't Proof." The author claimed I'd fabricated my connection to La Rosa by exploiting Clara's family. They even dug into my past, photos from my youth, articles I'd written, my breakdown after the war. They turned my trauma into ammunition. Someone online found a picture of me from my Global Lens years, holding my camera, smiling through exhaustion, and captioned it. The comments flooded in like shrapnel. "Old people should stop rewriting history. She's probably confusing dreams with memory." That poor Isabella lady. Imagine being harassed at her age. I closed my eyes and saw Miguel's face, calm, steady, unbreakable. He'd warned me once. Truth has enemies. They wear polite smiles. Now I was living proof. By the end of the week, Isabella's family released a statement through a law firm. The Velasquez family deeply respects Mrs. Rutherford's past contributions, but firmly maintains that the authorship of La Rosa belongs to Isabella Velasquez. "We ask the media to respect our privacy." They called it authorship. Not truth, not life. Authorship. As if history were a script you could assign to whoever played the role best. The home's administrator knocked on my door that evening, accompanied by a public relations woman in a perfect navy suit. "We're receiving too much attention, Ms. Rutherford," she said crisply. "The board thinks it would be best for you to issue a short apology. Say you were confused, emotional, perhaps misremembering events. It would make this all go away." I laughed, a dry, brittle sound that startled even me. "Misremembering? You mean rewriting the lie so it fits neatly back into your archive?" The PR woman crossed her legs, unbothered. "Think of it as restoring order. You'll be more comfortable. Everyone will." "Comfort is overrated," I said. "So is order." They left without another word. The next morning, Clara came anyway. She wasn't in uniform, just jeans, a sweater, and eyes swollen from crying. She slipped into my room through the service entrance. "They told me I can't come here," she said. "I don't care. You shouldn't risk it," I said softly. "They'll fire you for good. They already did." For a moment, neither of us spoke. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "Kenny. This came in the mail. Addressed to you, but sent to my apartment. No return name. Just a seal from Bogota." My heart stuttered. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, handwritten in shaky Spanish. "Forgive me, Rose. I kept your name safe too long, but they are coming for the negatives. Don't let them silence you again. I, Isabella." The ink had bled from tears or rain. "She knows what they're doing," Clara said. "They want to control the story, even now." "They already do," I whispered. "Then take it back." Her words hit like a match. I looked at her. This young woman who had already lost everything for a truth she hadn't even lived. And I realized the fight was no longer about a photograph. It was about the cost of silence passed down like inheritance. That night, the harassment grew louder. Anonymous letters slid under my door. Liar. Thief. Let her rest. Someone scratched FRAU'd on my locker in the recreation hall. The staff stopped making eye contact. The television blared debates about me while I sat invisible in the common room. One anchor summed it up perfectly. In the end, truth isn't about facts. It's about who people choose to believe. And nobody believed me. Except Clara. I wrote back to the address on Isabella's letter, not to ask for help, but to say goodbye. You kept me safe once. Now let me finish what you started. I won't let them bury us again. Then I hid the original negative inside a hollow in the wooden box, beneath my old press card. Because if they were coming for the evidence, they wouldn't get it easily. 2 days later, the news broke. Isabella Velasquez had been hospitalized after a sudden stroke. The same reporters who called me a liar now broadcast candlelight vigils in her honor. They called her a national treasure, the last witness of compassion. No one mentioned that her last letter was to me. I sat alone by my window, the envelope still on my lap, the bracelet cool against my skin. The world had turned upside down again. The liar made the legend, and the legend fading into silence. But storms don't last forever. They only clear the air before the next lightning strike. The morning after the headlines turned to prayer vigils and retrospectives, I woke to a different kind of silence. Not the wary hush of the staff avoiding me, but the heavy stillness that follows bad news. The intercom crackled mid-breakfast. Residents, please join us in a moment of reflection for our beloved guest, Ms. Say. Isabella Velasquez, who passed peacefully last night. The spoon fell from my hand. Oatmeal splashed across the tray, gray and useless. The sound that left my throat wasn't grief exactly. It was the hollow echo of unfinished words. They buried her story before she could finish telling it. Again. 2 days later, Clara returned, not as a nurse, but as family. She came with red-rimmed eyes and a small brown envelope, the corner soft from being handled too often. This was in her nightstand, she said. It's addressed to you. My fingers trembled as I took it. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and medicine. On the front, written in Isabella's shaky handwriting, were the words, "For Rose, when the world is ready to listen." I hesitated before opening it. For a moment, I was afraid that whatever was inside would undo me completely. But truth doesn't wait for courage. It demands it. Inside was a single sheet of thin stationery, written in blue ink that bled along the fibers. "If she ever finds this," it began, "tell her I kept her name alive in a safer form. They said she was dangerous, that her pictures would expose too much. They said the name Evelyn Rutherford must disappear. So I gave them another name. Mine. It was the only way her work could live without her dying for it. I wore her story like a borrowed coat. Too heavy, too large, but it kept the cold away. I thought I would return it someday. But the world kept applauding, and I was too weak to interrupt the clapping. If she ever forgives me, tell her the girl in the photograph still remembers the woman behind the lens." The last line trailed off, ink smeared by a tear that had dried into the paper. I read it again and again, until the words blurred into one long pulse. All the anger I'd carried, the bitterness, the betrayal crumbled into something quieter. She hadn't stolen me. She had hidden me. Hidden my name under hers, like a child smuggling light inside a coat. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the sea through the smudged window. For years I had cursed her for taking everything from me, when in truth she'd given me survival. Without her lie, Mama Rose would have died in a nameless jungle, her photos confiscated, her legacy burned by censors. Isabella hadn't erased me, she had transformed me. Turned me into a myth the world could love safely, a legend without the scars. And in doing so, she had condemned herself to live a lie so that I could still exist somewhere, even as a rumor. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my chest. For the first time in months, the air in my room felt breathable. "She didn't betray you," Clara said softly from the doorway. "She protected you?" I nodded. "And I spent half a lifetime hating her for it." Clara stepped closer, placing the copper bracelet on the table beside the letter. It gleamed faintly in the morning light, warm and alive. "Then maybe now," she said, "it's your turn to protect her story." I sat there for hours, the letter open beside me, tracing the loops of Isabella's handwriting. Each line felt like a bridge between us. A confession written too late, but not lost. Somewhere outside, a gull cried over the water. The sound was lonely but fierce. I reached for my camera, the one I'd hidden for decades, and turned it toward the window. The reflection of the sky filled the lens. I pressed the shutter. Click. It wasn't a photo of war, or of loss, or of legend. It was proof that I was still here. That night, I slipped the letter into the wooden box with the film and the press card. The three artifacts lay together like pieces of a puzzle finally aligned. I whispered to the dark, "You didn't betray me, Isabella. You just changed the frame." And in that quiet, I felt her presence, soft, forgiving, eternal. The morning after I read Isabella's letter, the sea outside my window looked like a sheet of glass. Perfect, unbroken, waiting for a stone to shatter it. I knew what I had to do. For 40 years, I'd hidden behind silence. Isabella had used her name to keep me safe. But now she was gone, and the world had rewritten the story again, this time with me as the villain. If I didn't act now, La Rosa would remain a lie forever. I wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. "The truth is not dead." It was mislabeled. Then I dialed the number of a journalist whose work I'd been following for years. Maya Torres, a young investigative reporter from the Independent Tribune. She had built her career exposing cover-ups and forgotten women of history. When she answered, her voice was brisk and curious. "This is Maya. Ms. Torres," I said. "You don't know me, but I think I have a story you've been looking for." There was a pause. "And who might that be?" "Evelyn Rutherford, the real photographer behind La Rosa." Silence again. The kind that tells you someone has just sat up straight. "You're joking." "I wish I were. If you come to Silver Harbor tomorrow morning, I'll show you proof. The original negative, metadata, everything." "Metadata?" she asked, skeptical but intrigued. "Go Tinter. Dated 1973. Location: Barranza Bermeja, Colombia. The initials, E. Rutherford, are embedded in the edge code. You'll see it yourself." "And what do you want from me?" "Not fame," I said. "Just for the world to see the right name under that photo, even if they never remember the face." She hesitated, then said, "I'll be there." That night, I barely slept. Clara helped me prepare, though she knew it was risky. We converted the recreation room into a makeshift archive. White sheets for backdrop, a single lamp for contrast. I laid out everything. The wooden box, the film reel, Isabella's letter, and my cracked Leica lens. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. "The board's already watching you." "Let them," I said. "They can't fire a ghost twice." Clara smiled faintly. "Then let me do something too." "Like what?" "They're holding a memorial for Isabella tomorrow in the same hall. Press, donors, everyone. I'll set up a live stream. Quiet, discreet. If they try to bury you again, the whole world will see." I looked at her. This girl who had lost her job, her peace, yet still chose to stand beside me. "You remind me of someone," I said. "Your friend Isabella?" "Joe," I said softly, "the woman I used to be." By dawn, everything was in place. Maya arrived in a raincoat, camera bag slung over her shoulder, skeptical eyes darting around the corridors. "So this is where history hides," she muttered. I handed her the film. My fingers brushed hers. Cold meeting warmth, decades collapsing into a single exchange. "Careful," I said. "Once this goes public, they'll try to discredit it." She examined the reel, then pulled out a magnifier. "It's old, but intact. And you're right. There's an edge mark here. E. Rutherford. That's enough to start. I showed her the letter next, Isabella's handwriting trembling across the page. Maya read it silently, then exhaled. This changes everything, she said. But we'll need to verify it, get expert confirmation. Do it, I said. I don't care how long it takes, as long as it's the truth. She nodded, tucking the film into a protective sleeve. I'll start publishing tomorrow. Are you ready for the backlash? It already came, I said. Now it's my turn. That afternoon, the hall filled with mourners for Isabella Velasquez's memorial service. There were flowers everywhere. Lilies, orchids, even a printed banner of La Rosa. The irony didn't escape me. Clara worked quietly in the background, setting up a small tripod near the back wall, her phone angled toward the podium. Nobody noticed her. When the ceremony began, I waited until the first eulogy ended before stepping into the light. Gasps rippled through the room. The infamous fraud, back from exile. I wore black, but not for mourning. For armor. Excuse me, I said, voice calm but cutting through the air like glass. If you're going to speak about legacy, you might as well tell the whole story. Clara's live stream was already rolling. The red light blinked faintly at the edge of the room. I took out a small printed copy of the letter, Isabella's confession, and placed it on the podium. She didn't steal from me, I said, eyes sweeping the crowd. She saved me. But now that she's gone, you're all trying to erase her truth again. You're turning her love into fraud and my silence into madness. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted for me to step down. No, I said firmly. Not this time. The original negative exists. It bears my name, my code, my fingerprints. And a journalist has it right now. Not. A murmur swept the hall. If anything happens to that film or to me, I continued, it's already been sent to multiple archives. The truth is out of your reach now. It will live, the way Isabella wanted it to. Across the room, Clara met my eyes. She nodded once, steady, unafraid. The live stream had already gone viral. Thousands, watching, comments flooding in, demanding answers. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was defending myself. I was defending her. She kept my name alive in a safer form, I said softly. Now I'll do the same for hers. In the only form that never dies. The truth. When it was over, the hall emptied in stunned silence. Outside, rain began to fall, hard, relentless, cleansing. Clara and I stood by the doorway, soaked but unshaken. You just set off a bomb, she said, half in awe. Good, I replied. Maybe now the world will finally see the smoke. She laughed, tears mixing with rain. What will you do now? I looked toward the sea, gray and endless. Wait, I said, for the light to develop. The storm broke 3 days later. Maya's article went live at dawn. The real I. Behind La Rosa. New evidence reveals forgotten photographer. Evelyn Rutherford. Within hours, it spread everywhere. Major outlets mirrored it. Historians debated it. Museums scrambled to verify. The image of the negative, my name etched along its edge, circulated like a resurrection. But the real explosion didn't come from the article. Me. It came that evening. The Silver Harbor Auditorium, once just a place for bingo nights and charity concerts, had been transformed again. This time, the museum board called it a press conference to clarify the confusion. Clara and I both knew what that meant. Damage control. Rows of cameras filled the hall. The projector was set up on stage, its white screen glowing faintly like a waiting confession booth. I sat in the front row beside Clara, the copper bracelet cool against my wrist, the letter from Isabella folded neatly in my pocket. The air vibrated with whispers. At the podium, the museum's spokesperson, a man in an impeccable suit, cleared his throat. We want to address the recent claims surrounding the authorship of the photograph La Rosa. In light of new materials presented by Ms. Dodd, Rutherford and independent journalist Maya Torres, our restoration team has examined the original negative. He gestured toward the technician beside the projector. Tonight, we will display the scanned version of that film strip so that everyone may judge for themselves. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. The first image flickered onto the screen. It was a contact sheet, grainy frames, the chaos of 1973 frozen in sequence. Wounded villagers, burning trucks, Miguel's field tent, and finally her. Isabella. Standing in the rubble, clutching a white flower, staring into my lens, a collective gasp filled the room. Even after half a century, the image still carried its quiet defiance. Then the technician zoomed in, revealing a detail no one had ever noticed before. In the corner of a shattered mirror behind Isabella's shoulder. A reflection. Not of smoke or sky. Of me. The outline of my face, camera raised, eyes fixed, finger on the shutter. A ripple went through the audience, a sound somewhere between disbelief and awe. My God, someone whispered. It's her. The spokesperson adjusted his glasses, his composure slipping. The embedded data confirms the negative. Predates any reproduction attributed to Ms. Zas. Velasquez. The initials E. R. are visible along the sprocket line. There is no doubt who took the photograph. The silence that followed was deafening. I rose slowly, my cane steadying me more out of habit than need. The cameras turned as one, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. I was never a legend, I said, my voice carrying through the hall. I was just the woman who pressed the shutter when truth appeared. It wasn't a line rehearsed, it simply came. The only sentence big enough to hold a lifetime. Someone began clapping, then another, and another. Within seconds the room erupted. Applause, sobs, flashes. It was like watching the tide come in after 40 years of drought. The moderator stepped aside. Ms. Rutherford, he said, if you would, share your story. I took the microphone. The weight of it felt like the old Leica in my hands. Solid, familiar, alive. That day, I began, I didn't set out to make history. I set out to make sure one girl's face wouldn't be lost among the smoke. That girl was Isabella Velasquez. She was 17. She survived when most didn't. She kept my name alive when I couldn't use it. She became the myth so that I could stay alive long enough to tell you this. The crowd was silent again. No one dared move. History loves neat stories, I continued. Heroes and villains. But the truth is messy. It bleeds, it hides in corners of broken mirrors. Sometimes, the person you think stole your life was the one keeping it safe. I reached into my coat and unfolded Isabella's letter, holding it up so the cameras could capture it. She wrote this before she died. If she ever finds this, tell her I kept her name alive in a safer form. A collective sigh filled the hall, like the whole room exhaled at once. So, I'm not here to take credit, I said softly. I'm here to give it back, to both of us. Because La Rosa was never just a photograph. It was a promise. At that moment, Clara stepped forward. Her phone was live again, streaming everything. Say it, she whispered to me. Say what they need to hear. I turned toward the screen, where my younger self still stared back at me through the reflection. I was never a legend, I repeated, this time slower. Just a woman who dared to look when others turned away. Then, from the back of the hall, a familiar voice cut through the applause. Trembling, frail, impossible. Then let's share the light, Mama Rose. The crowd turned. An old woman in a hospital gown was being wheeled an oxygen tube, silver hair, a defiant spark in her eyes. Isabella. Not gone, not yet. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras spun toward her. She raised a shaky hand. They told me to rest, she said weakly. But I couldn't. Not until I saw you take back the light. I moved toward her. The crowd parted like water. When our hands met, the years between us collapsed. You stubborn girl, I whispered. You stubborn ghost, she answered, smiling through tears. We stood there. Two women bound by one photograph and 1,000 lies, and the flashes exploded around us. Not as weapons this time, but as witnesses. Later, the museum's representative stepped forward, voice shaking. In light of new evidence, he said, The authorship of La Rosa will be formally amended to credit both photographers, Evelyn Rutherford and Isabella Velasquez. Applause thundered again. People rose to their feet. Even the journalists wiped their eyes. Isabella squeezed my hand. "They finally see us," she whispered. "They always did," I said. "They just didn't know what they were looking at." As the crowd dispersed, Maya came to the stage, face lit with triumph. "I did it," she said. "You changed the story." "No," I said, glancing at the projection one last time. "I just finished it." The photo stayed on the screen. The girl with the white flower. The broken mirror behind her. The reflection of the woman holding the camera. For the first time, people weren't just seeing the subject. They were seeing the witness. And for the first time in 40 years, I was no longer invisible. When the lights came back up, Isabella was exhausted. The medics tried to wheel her away, but she refused until she'd said one last thing. "Evelyn," she murmured, "promise me something." "Anything. Keep the light moving." I nodded, unable to speak. She smiled faintly. "Then let's share it, forever." And as the cameras flashed one final time, we stood together. Two women framed in history at last. Not rivals, not ghosts, just bearers of the same truth. Outside, the rain had stopped, like Mom and my thing. That night, the photograph was re-uploaded to every archive on Earth. The caption finally read, La Rosa, 1973. Photograph by Evelyn Rutherford and Isabella Velasquez. A collaboration of survival and light. I watched the update appear on Maya's tablet, tears streaking silently down my face. Clara leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "It's done." "No," I said, smiling faintly, "finally begun." The night after the ceremony, the sea outside Silver Harbor was unnaturally calm, flat as glass, moonlight lying over it like a sheet of silk. The hall was still glowing from the lights of the press conference, though the cameras had long gone and the flowers from Isabella's memorial now wilted quietly in their vases. I sat in the corridor outside the infirmary, listening to the faint rhythmic hiss of an oxygen machine. Inside the room, Isabella slept, her breathing shallow but steady, her hand still clutching the copy of our photograph that Clara had printed for her. The doctor said she'd made it through the day by sheer will. "To finish something," one of them said softly. And I knew exactly what that something was. Just past midnight, I woke from a half-sleep in the chair to the sudden silence of machines. No alarms, no panic. Just a single, long breath that didn't return. On. I went into the room. She looked peaceful, her face turned slightly toward the window, the faintest smile on her lips. The moonlight made her look almost young again, like the girl with the flower who once stood in the rubble and refused to look away. I sat beside her bed and took her hand, cold now, but still soft, and whispered, "You kept your promise, mi Rosa. You gave the world light." For a long time I stayed there, until the nurses came and gently led me back to my room. I didn't cry. I'd done all my crying 40 years ago. This was something else. A stillness so complete it felt like peace itself. The next morning, the home was flooded with calls and flowers. The world mourned the dual legacy of Velasquez and Rutherford. Two women who shared one lens. For once, the headlines got it right. The administrators, suddenly eager to redeem their earlier cruelty, brought me breakfast in person. Reporters waited outside the gate, asking for interviews. Claimed them all. There are some stories that don't need more telling. Only living. Clara returned 2 days later, reinstated, her badge shining new against her uniform. She came into my room quietly, her steps lighter, her face radiant even through exhaustion. Around her neck hung a thin chain. At the end of it was the copper bracelet. She smiled and unhooked it, then gently placed it around my neck instead. It rested over my heart, warm from her skin. "Now the name belongs to both of us," she said. I reached up and touched the cool metal. The engraving RE caught the morning light. "No," I said softly, "it belongs to all of us now." Clara laughed, tears bright in her eyes. "I still can't believe the world finally saw the real story." "They saw the picture," I corrected. "The story was always bigger." She tilted her head. "Will you ever pick up the camera again?" I thought for a long time before answering. Maybe. But not to chase ghosts. This time, I'll take pictures of the living. That afternoon, she helped me down to the garden by the sea. The air smelled of salt and rain. A small crowd of residents gathered there for sunset, as they always did, their faces bathed in gold. I lifted the camera Maya had returned to me after the exhibit, the same Leica I'd once sworn never to touch again. Its leather was cracked, the lens slightly clouded, but when I held it up, the world slipped perfectly into frame. Clara stood beside me, her hair catching the wind, her eyes bright with something like hope. I took one photo, then another. Click. Click. When I looked through the viewfinder again, I could almost see them standing there in the light. Miguel, smiling with his quiet grace. Isabella, her hands wrapped around that eternal white flower. They didn't look like ghosts anymore. Just people who had finally come home. That night, I placed the developed print on my nightstand. In the picture, Clara and I were laughing, the ocean blazing behind us. The copper bracelet shimmered against my chest. For once, there was no shadow in the frame. Just light. Later, as I turned off the lamp, I whispered the words Miguel once told me in that field tent so long ago. If you take one last picture, make it of peace. And I realized, I finally had. A year passed. The storm of headlines, arguments, and documentaries about La Rosa eventually quieted into history's gentle hum. People moved on to new scandals, new tragedies. But in a small corner of Silver Harbor, something tender began to grow out of all that noise. I called it Memory Light Studio. It wasn't really a studio at first, just a sunroom by the garden with cracked windows and salt stains on the floor. But every morning, light poured in through the glass like honey, soft and forgiving. And that was enough. I started the class for the women who lived here. Those who thought their lives were already over, their stories already framed. They came with trembling hands and wary eyes, each carrying a camera borrowed from the recreation closet. Else. The rule was simple: no filters, no edits, only the truth of light. At first, they laughed. Said I sounded like a preacher. But after the first lesson, they stopped laughing. Because once you teach someone to really see light, not as decoration but as witness, they begin to see themselves differently too. I taught them how to catch reflections in teacups, the gleam of silver hair in morning sun, the shimmer of raindrops clinging to a window pane. I showed them that light never asks a person's age before it chooses where to fall. See? I'd say, holding up a shot one of them took. That glow on your cheek isn't youth. It's memory. They started to believe me. Soon, the studio became a small sanctuary. The women brought photos of their grandchildren, of gardens long gone, of weddings that didn't last. They taped them on the wall beside mine, a mosaic of time, imperfect and radiant. And above them all, I hung the photograph that had started it all. La Rosa, now credited to both names. Evelyn Rutherford and Isabella Velasquez. Below it, carved into a simple wooden frame, were the words, "The light never forgets her name." Sometimes, younger women from town came to visit, curious about the famous Mama Rose, who'd turned a scandal into a school. They'd peek in during lessons, clutching their phones like armor. I'd smile and wave them in. "No filters here," I'd tease. "Only courage." They always laughed, then ended up staying the whole afternoon. One afternoon, while I was helping a student named Margaret focus her lens, she asked, "Ms. Day, Evelyn, is it true you were once a war photographer?" I nodded. "Once. Weren't you afraid?" I thought about it. About bombs, loss, silence, and truth. Then I smiled. "Always. But fear's a poor reason to close your eyes." She clicked the shutter then, and the flash of the old Polaroid lit up the room. For a heartbeat, I saw my younger self reflected in her expression, fierce, unsure, but alive. At the end of each session, I'd hang one new print from each woman on the wall. I called it the living exhibit, the first time they saw their work displayed. The unfiltered wrinkles, the bright veins, the unflinching truth. Some cried. "I didn't know I could look like that," one said. "You mean honest?" I asked. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes. Honest. I smiled. That's all Light ever asks for. When the day ended, I often stayed alone in the studio. The late sun would slick through the blinds, painting the floor in long stripes of gold. Sometimes, I'd close my eyes and listen to the soft hum of the world, the sound of people still breathing, still remembering. In that quiet, I could almost hear them again. Miguel's laughter, Isabella's accent, the click of a camera shutter in the distance. They weren't ghosts anymore, just light in motion. Clara came by every evening after her shift. She'd sit on the windowsill, watching the students' photos dry on the line. The copper bracelet still hung around my neck, warm against my skin. "You've turned this place into something alive," she said one night. "No," I said, "it was alive. It just needed to be seen." She smiled. "You sound like you're teaching me again." "I'm always teaching someone," I said, "even myself." She reached out and gently touched the bracelet. "You know, my grandmother would have loved this. She always said stories are like light. They travel even after we're gone." "She's still here," I said quietly. "Look around." The sunset spilled across the wall of photos. For a second, every face glowed. Sometimes at night, I dreamt of the jungle again. Not the explosions or the screams, but the strange, peaceful light that came after. In those dreams, Isabella stood beside me, camera in hand, pointing toward a horizon we'd never reached. "Do you think they'll remember us?" she'd ask. And in the dream, I always answered, "They already do. They just don't know our names yet." One rainy morning, I arrived at the studio to find the women already there, laughing, arranging flowers in old jars. They'd framed one of my recent photos, a shot of the ocean at sunrise, and hung it next to La Rosa. Underneath, they'd written in chalk, "For the woman who taught us to see ourselves again." I laughed so hard I nearly cried. "You're supposed to be the students," I said. "We are," one of them replied. "But you're the lesson." Later that day, a journalist from a photography magazine came to interview me. She was young, nervous, holding her recorder like a lifeline. "Ms. Rutherford," she asked, "after everything that happened, how do you define legacy?" I thought for a long time before answering. "Legacy," I said finally, "isn't a name carved in stone. It's the light someone leaves behind when they stop trying to own it." She smiled through tears. "That's beautiful." "No," I said, "it's true." When the sun began to set, I dismissed the class early. The garden was glowing in orange light, the air heavy with salt and rain. As I locked the studio door, Margaret called out, "Miss Evelyn, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you still let anyone call you Mama Rose?" I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from both joy and ache. "On times," I said. "When?" I looked toward the sea, the last light spilling across the horizon, and whispered, "When the light hits just right, I hear her call back. My younger self." And that's enough. That night, I sat alone in the studio, the copper bracelet warm against my chest. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating the words carved above the photographs. "The light never forgets her name." I whispered it aloud, just to feel the shape of it in my mouth. The light never forgets. And for the first time, I believed it. Because after everything, the wars, the lies, the decades of silence, the light had finally come back. Not to erase the darkness, but to prove it never won. Sometimes the younger nurses still tease me, calling me Mama Rose when they pass in the halls. I always smile. Because now it's not a name of pity or nostalgia. It's a title I share with Isabella, with Clara, with every woman who ever refused to fade quietly into someone else's story. The last photograph I ever took hangs in the center of the wall. It's not famous. It won't win awards. But it's mine. It shows the studio bathed in afternoon light. The women are laughing. Clara is holding up her camera, and in the reflection of a glass frame, I can see myself, smiling back. For once, I'm not behind the lens. I'm inside the picture. And that's where I'll stay. The camera light blinked red, a tiny pulse in the quiet room. Clara stood behind it, her hands steady, waiting for my signal. Outside the window, the sea hummed softly against the rocks, the same rhythm that had carried me through war, through lies, through the years when silence felt safer than truth. I sat in the chair beneath the soft white lamp, the copper bracelet glinting faintly against my throat. The walls behind me were covered with photographs, my students' work, the women of Memory Light Studio, faces alive with laughter and unfiltered light. "Here?" Clara asked. I nodded. And then, looking straight into the lens, into the small black eye that had once terrified me, I began to speak. "If one day," I said, voice steady, "someone calls you by the name you buried 40 years ago, don't be afraid." I paused. I wanted the sentence to breathe, to find its way through the air, the way truth always does. Slow, stubborn, unstoppable. It may not be the past haunting you. It may just be the world reminding you that the truest part of yourself never died. It was only waiting for you to answer. For a long moment, I let the silence hang. The camera hummed softly. I could feel the pulse in my wrist beating beneath the copper. "People think salvation comes when someone forgives you," I continued. "But sometimes it comes when someone remembers you. When they speak the name you thought no one would ever dare to say again." He smiled, small but real. "That's how light works, you know. It travels long after its source is gone. You can't kill light. You can only wait long enough for it to reach you." I looked away for a second, at the wall of photographs behind me. The mosaic of stories I'd helped others tell. Women who once hid their faces now smiled openly, wrinkles glowing like map lines of survival. "I used to think truth needed to be protected," I said softly. "But truth doesn't need protection. It just needs a witness brave enough to keep looking at it, even when it hurts." I leaned a little closer to the camera. "So share this story. Not because it's mine, but because it might belong to someone you know. Someone who stopped answering to her own name. Someone who forgot what her light looked like." Clara lowered her eyes for a moment, fighting tears. I could see the reflection of the red recording light in her pupils. "Tell her," I said, "that memory isn't a burden, it's a language. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to learn to speak it again." I reached up and touched the copper bracelet. The metal was warm, almost alive. "They once called me Mama Rose," I said quietly. "For years, I hated that name. It reminded me of loss, of being erased. But now, I understand. It wasn't a curse. It was a map back to myself. So if someone calls you by a name you've hidden, listen. Maybe they're not trying to pull you backward. Maybe they're handing you back the piece of you that refused to die." The camera kept rolling. The light blinked, patient, unjudging. I took a deep breath and let the weight of the years settle into my voice. "Share this story," I said again, firmer now. "Share it so that someone out there remembers that redemption doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from the one who calls us by the name we left behind." The waves outside broke softly against the shore. The studio smelled faintly of developer and salt. I could hear the distant laughter of my students down the hall. "My story ends here," I said finally, "but maybe that's just the beginning for someone else." I leaned forward, meeting the camera's gaze one last time. "Because sometimes," I whispered, "the first picture worth taking is the one where you stop hiding behind the lens." Clara stopped the recording, but for a moment neither of us moved. The air felt charged, like the instant after lightning, when everything is sharper, truer. She smiled through her tears. "It's perfect, Miss Evelyn." I shook my head gently. "No, Clara, it's just honest." That night, we uploaded the video. It wasn't edited, filtered, or framed. Just truth, unpolished, steady, real. And as it began to spread, message after message arrived from women around the world, each one writing, "I remember my name now.